Good day, my stalwart watchers, the Green Scorpion here, and in the last 2 weeks we examined the deadly demons of hell and the eccentric egotists of science, but today's monster has a more sacred origin. We're going Old Testament on this channel with Golems, hulking giants from Jewish and Kabbalist folklore. It was said that certain devout men, such as rabbis, could learn to replicate God's miracles, just to a lesser extent. So just as God once sculpted mankind in his image out of clay, a holy person could sculpt any inert material into the shape of a human being and bring it to life as a golem. Or golem, however you want to pronounce it. The most famous of these stories is the Golem of Prague, where in the 1600s Rabbi Loew brought a golem to life to protect his village from those who would do harm to its Jewish inhabitants. There are many variations of the classic golem story, usually with the golem gaining some level of sapience. Sometimes they become interested in spiritualism, sometimes they go too far in the way of protection and incite fear into the masses, sometimes they rebel against their creator and have to be deactivated. And for as many ways as this story could end, there are just as many genres that branch off this story. Pinocchio, in a sense, is a golem story, and by extension so is Astro Boy. Any tale of AI trying to be human, and homunculi are something of a Christian canon equivalent to golems. Golems were said to be made from not just clay, but often stone, iron, or even flesh. So Frankenstein's monster? Kind of a golem. And with their usual role as protectors, the golem is sort of the father of superhero stories. Superman was originally created by 2 Jewish writers, as were the Fantastic Four, which included a Jewish man made of stone.
How about that?
And with their inclusion in the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual, golems in fantasy take on the vague form of any inert materials molded into a humanoid shape and magically given autonomy, usually to protect an area or follow direct orders of their creator. I did have to cut off some golem subtypes that I might want to make into a different countdown someday, so I'm avoiding any sentient puppets, made in the lab artificial life forms, and straight up robots since I already made that list. That leaves us with a lot of generic rock monsters, but also some diamonds in the rough. So let's start digging. These are my top 10 video game golems. L'chaim! Though golems are commonly a fantasy creature, I hope you've learned by now that fantasy and sci-fi are just 2 sides of the same coin, and won't be too alarmed when we start this list on the distant planet of Talon 4. And besides, Phazon is basically magic. It's a supernatural substance with untold power and kinda just does whatever the hell it wants. As Samus Aran searches a space pirate base, she can read up on some of the recent experiments, which is perhaps the only source of comedy in this game. These idiots will do anything for a shiny new weapon, and apparently it's led to massive casualties among their people, particularly with the radioactive Phazon that they've been mining. Running experiments on some unprocessed Phazon ore, the aliens have brought to life Thardis, a giant of stone and ice who was too temperamental to be used for security and is now locked up in the aptly named Quarantine Cave. Based on the way its body parts float magnetically beside each other, I would almost think to call Thardis an Earth Elemental rather than a golem. Like, it's just too otherworldly. But he's checking all the boxes in terms of lore. Brought to life using implied phlebotinum or inanimate material, intended to be set guarding the Phazon mines, but instead rebelled against its creators. That's classic golem storytelling. Also neat in terms of lore because this is the first time we actually see Phazon being alive, foreshadowing the genesis of Dark Samus. But let's focus on the big ball of rubble first. The tough part about fighting Thardis is his physiology. It doesn't really look like it has any vital organs, and we'd be here all day trying to wear down its stony shell. Luckily, by using the thermal visor, we can determine which rocks house the life-giving Phazon and then blast them apart. Doing so does unleash energy that temporarily overloads the visor, so we'll need to last a few minutes in between volleys. Thardis will throw boulders at Samus, manipulate the ice to flash freeze her, and even roll up into a massive wrecking ball thanks to the spider ball upgrade that it somehow got a hold of. And once you learn the pattern to avoid these attacks, it's just cool to watch this thing move. Eventually we'll destroy all its weak points and make a molehill out of a mountain, but Thardis does get one last laugh. Is that slapstick? In my Metroid game? I take it back, Metroid Prime is a comedic masterpiece. Thardis is pretty simple as far as Metroid bosses go, but also extremely unique among the usual roster of organic mutants. And we've never seen this guy return, outside of Metroid Prime Pinball, which is just a pinball retelling of Metroid Prime's story. Yeah, remember when that happened? But I think it's that lightning in a bottle that's kept Thardus one of the most memorable bosses in the series, not to be named Ridley or Mother Brain. Pour one out for the many dead space pirates who made this fight possible. While collecting possible candidates for this list, I found that a lot of golems were little more than the bare minimum advertised. Disgaea has wood golems, they're golems made of wood. Dragon Quest has gold golems, they're golems made of gold. Mold a material in the shape of a man and let it lumber around and boom, instant golem. But this kind of simplicity can be extremely memorable when mixed with some environmental factors. Take Dark Souls for example, which features quite a few golems. Seath the Scaleless made some crystal golems, and there's some large stone knights around the Moonlight Butterfly's perch. These make for great basic enemy encounters, but the one that sticks out in my mind is the strangely iconic Iron Golem. I mean, the golem itself is pretty simple. It's just a giant animated suit of armor with a big axe. But he also happens to be standing atop Sen's fortress, and boy, I say boy, let me tell you about Sen's fortress. I don't know who this Sen guy is, but if I ever meet him, I'm gonna have some choice words. His fortress guards the path up to Orlando, the golden city of the gods, so I'm assuming maybe he was some kind of Hephaestus-type divine inventor. His tower is filled wall to wall with deadly traps, pressure plates, arrow launchers, Indiana Jones boulders, not to mention a mimic that's likely the first one you've encountered in this game. The building itself is trying to kill you. So to get past all that and see this giant aluminum hunk guarding the bridge out of here, oh hell no! This fight can be a lot harder too, thanks to a pair of rock giants on the neighboring towers. Back in the fortress, you can actually go out of your way to kill these guys before the boss fight and save yourself 2 ranged headaches. But I don't blame you if you didn't want to tiptoe around these traps for that long. You might just decide to deal with them poking at you during the fight. The Iron Golem himself has a modest pool of attacks. Nothing over the top that's going to define the fight, but also nothing so distinct that you can easily see it coming. He'll swing his axe down, or sometimes just punch the ground when he wants to be a little faster. He's got a ranged attack if you're keeping your distance, and if you spend too much time under him, he can stomp the ground or pick you up for a throw. He has just enough options to let him deal with every likely strategy you can bring to the table. The worst part is that you're really high up, so he might just knock you off to your instant doom. But the best part is that you're really high up, so you might knock him to his instant doom. If you hit the same leg enough times, he'll start to wobble like a toddler, and eventually take a knee so that you can really rack up the damage. But every so often, you can get him in just the right position to careen over the edge for a quick win, and it's very satisfying. So overall a cool boss fight, and some cool bits of lore, so why isn't he any higher? Well, as we explore these next 8 entries, a common theme we'll be seeing is a golem designed for a certain task, and how it either adheres to or evolves past that original purpose. By contrast, Thardus is a golem successfully made, except for the part where it's supposed to listen to its creators. Sen's Iron Golem is a golem acting exactly as intended, guarding the path to Ersatz Asgard as the crowning jewel of a larger security system. Given its size and the precarious boss fight it provides, it's more memorable than the variety of common golem guards that we see in random encounters throughout RPG history, though it is still in essence a very simple golem. We'll see future golems assert more personality, but the novelty of Sen's fortress is how impersonal it feels to get killed in this place, like your enemies couldn't even be bothered to show up themselves. For every cheap death, it's 100 times more satisfying to watch this 18-wheeler sized body fall into the mist. I can just imagine Lord Gwyn's face.
How did you get past security? His fortress is impenetrable.
Door was unlocked.
Son of a bitch!
When I choose entries for Monster Month, I'm mainly interested in specific characters rather than creatures that appear as a type of enemy in a game. For example, in Top 10 Zombies, I included the one-of-a-kind Nemesis Type T and Stubbs the Zombie, but not all of the infected from Left 4 Dead or something like that. Same with the Iron Golem being the only one of its kind in Dark Souls. I could have made an exception for the Claymen from Mother 3. These enemies are pretty important to the overall plot and actually have some neat ties to the classic Golem myth, like being made of clay and having an activation device on their forehead similar to the Golem of Prague. But even they get overshadowed by a specific example in the previous game, Earthbound, and I just want to say I'm super excited to talk about this guy because he's so weird. So there's a point in Earthbound where you're playing as Jeff and you meet a guy named Brick Road. Yeah, that's his name. Mr. Road is interested in dungeon design, and puts you through his prototype, the eponymous dungeon. In actuality, it's just a maze in a cave where Brick's written some signs to simulate the dungeon talking to you. Brick himself admits it's not very interesting, but that he's going to be working with the famous Dr. Andonuts to create a true human dungeon hybrid, a challenging dungeon that can think like a man. Okay, follow your dreams, I guess. Later in the desert of Scaraba, Ness and his friends find the results of this research, the Dungeon Man Tower. There are 5 floors with mostly easy enemies, Brick didn't want to challenge his visitors too much, plus a working telephone, ATM, and bathroom for adventurers' convenience. And when you get to the top of the tower, you meet the, brains behind the dungeon, Brick Road himself grafted into the wall. That sounds like abject body horror, but the dude seems pretty satisfied with his new way of life, and even agrees to help Ness on his journey to collect the sacred melodies. It also makes him the first golem on this list capable of speech, which is cool. Then when you leave the building, the 5-story tower grows legs and joins your party. So yeah, this is Dungeon Man, technically the most powerful character in the game. Ridiculously high strength, but very low speed. You can't control him directly, but if you leave any enemies alive after the first turn of an encounter, he's certain to one-shot them. This game's limited presentation does hurt Dungeon Man a bit, but I can just imagine him bringing the whole West Wing down on his enemies and crushing them with a giant fist. And then you get to some trees that are too close together for Dungeon Man to pass, and he leaves your party forever. 2 minutes after he joined you. Well, showing you something cool and then rendering it utterly useless, that's classic Earthbound for you. But the Mother series is a masterclass in making small moments memorable, and similar to the Iron Golem, Dungeon Man is a part of this game's legacy in spite of his incredibly brief appearance. We got 2 twists stacked on top of each other here. The first is that he's a parody of Eve, a similarly useful giant robot in the previous Mother game. But instead of protecting you from the game's hardest enemies and going out with a meaningful sacrifice, Dungeon Man just doesn't fit the adventure. The other twist is the juxtaposition of a dungeon, something meant to challenge you in a video game, but then going out of its way to be as hospitable as possible. Like a good golem, Dungeon Man is here to serve. He's decked to the nines in basic amenities, and if you travel through this passage labeled Goodbye Exit, gross. He even has a garage full of collectible vehicles, and he'll lend you a submarine for the next leg of your journey. A yellow submarine. Brick Road's a McCartney fan. Dude, I like this guy. This is the kind of golem I'd invite over for a barbecue, provided he doesn't accidentally crush my house and squish all my neighbors. We also got the angle that Dungeon Man is the precursor to those Clayman golems from Mother 3, who were also invented using Dr. Andonuts' tech. Dungeon Man even made his way into Super Smash Bros. In the Magicant stage. Don't know what he's doing in Magicant, since in Earthbound he was exclusively found in Scaraba, but hey, can't a golem take a vacation once in a while? What's even crazier is that they kicked it up a notch in Smash Ultimate. Now, if you pause the game and angle the camera through Dungeon Man's eyes, you can actually see Brick Road's face embedded in the back wall, just like in the original game. That is super weird. I love it. I will admit we're getting into homunculus territory with this one, but if Brick's happy, I'm happy. Home is where the heart is, and at this point, I don't think we can remove it safely. Don't listen to JonTron. Castles can be friends. One thing we've downplayed so far is how strong golems actually are. I guess it's to be expected from brick and mortar behemoths, but even the medium golems tend to dwarf others in their size category in terms of strength. Case in point, Astaroth, the black giant from Soul Calibur. I actually forgot that he was a golem. Haven't thought about him much since... Jeez, top 10 axe wielders? So let's review this bloodthirsty juggernaut. Though the series is called Soul Calibur 1 is actually the sequel to Soul Edge, a game about a bunch of weapon masters fighting over the titular evil sword. That game had a guy named Rock as a big bruiser, but I guess he was a little boring because Soul Calibur 1 replaced Rock with Astaroth. Very similar moveset, completely new backstory. So famous is the power of Soul Edge that even Ares, the Greek god of war, wants it. So he orders his cult to make a golem that will retrieve the baneful blade. And amusingly, the cultists modeled the clay warrior off of Rock, which is the same thing that the devs at Bandai Namco did. Astaroth's powered by a divine core handed down by Ares himself, imbued with the combat memories of hundreds of fallen warriors. He also wields Kulutus, a giant axe that multiplies his strength even further. Standing between 6'4" and 7'2", depending on the game, Astaroth's actually the runt of this list so far, something I bet he's never been called. But in terms of pure deadlift, he's among the strongest of the Soul Calibur roster, filling the mighty Glacier role nicely. He's got power, he's got range, and while there is a windup to those swings, they come out a lot faster than you might expect. While Astaroth revels in the bloodlust of battle, he's no idiot, and will happily take advantage of anyone expecting him to be all brawn with no brains. In fact, his playstyle leans into that, playing with your opponent's perception of where they're safe to stand. And normally I'd say that this game does a good job communicating the weight of its bodies, but the way Astaroth can just paddleball them around, you'd think they were full of helium. One monstrous hit quickly becomes 2, then 5, and soon enough they're just praying that they hit the ground in one piece. Story-wise, Astaroth has spent a lot of time on the warpath, first by trying to find Soul Edge, and then working with Nightmare to restore the blade by doing his favorite thing, killing people. At one point there's a power struggle in the background with his cult leader planning to double-cross Ares and take Soul Edge for himself, and eventually Astaroth just gets sick of that argument and starts killing everyone in the cult. As discussed in the intro, there's a really common way for these golem myths to go, with the creation breaking the bonds of its creator to catastrophically violent results. Though interestingly, while Astaroth hates being controlled, he loves carrying out his original purpose, lopping off legs and chasing Soul Edge around. In a way, Astaroth will always be a slave to his creator's original intent. He's just gonna do it his way, and he's gonna enjoy the heck out of it. Sadly, the original Astaroth was melted down and replaced with an assembly line of Astaroths in Soul Calibur 5, which shows just how disposable golems can be, but us fans weren't having it. We don't want Astaroth model number G27. We want the original, the one with the rivalry with Maxi. So in the new continuity of Soul Calibur 6, the OG was brought back. He's mellowed out a bit from trying to punish his controllers, instead finding solace in the simple things. Cracking bones, screams of desperation, and the way a skull pops when you squeeze it just right.
Disgusting!
Oh, yeah, and he's got some really simple but effective trash talk. It's bad enough losing a quarter of your health because you misjudged his charge length, but hearing him yell,
"Worms!"
or
"Struggle!"
or
"Begone, you scum!"
really rubs salt on the wound. Astaroth presents a very classic Frankensteinian story attached to an immensely powerful character, with a unique moral twist on the concept of a manufactured slave. Maybe the golem likes serving its original function, but Astaroth could only enjoy that function when it was by his own choice. And with how enthusiastic he is about killing, one must imagine Astaroth happy.
Shut up!
Okay, maybe I will.
Scream!
Okay, which is it? Scream or shut up?
Ridiculous!
Well, we can agree on that at least.
Win! Struggle! Begone!
With over 1,000 species of creatures in the Pokemon franchise, it's never a surprise to find an example of any given animal or monster in the Pokedex. First, I need to give a quick honorable mention to Golurk, a Pokemon that I love a lot. Ghost Ground is a perfect type combination for a clay statue that's been imbued with a soul. There's a Dex entry about them being man-made, and they can fly like the Iron Giant. This would be a perfect example of a golem, but there's a larger topic with a bit more for us to talk about. A subgroup of giants collectively known as the Reggies. Regirock, Regice, and Registeel were introduced in Generation 3 with some of the most obscure conditions to find and catch them. If you know, you know. And if you don't, I seriously recommend looking up a wiki. It's pretty insane. Though it does make you feel like a real archaeologist when you finally unearth these curious constructs. Each of them are made out of an inanimate material: rock, ice, and steel. Though, interestingly, the Pokedex mentions that Registeel was originally made out of magma, and refined into its metal form from millennia of pressure beneath the earth. I would love to see a Regilava introduced in the series someday so we can see what that was actually like. Each giant has a unique orientation of 7 dots on its face, which may also be a reference to the Golems of myth. In these stories, golems were normally activated by a rabbi writing symbols of ancient writing either on the golem's forehead or on a rock that was placed in their mouth. This way, the golem could easily be activated or deactivated by writing or erasing this rune, often for turning a golem off during the Sabbath. And though Pokemon uses Braille instead of Yiddish, I don't think this is a coincidence, given that Gen 3's box legendaries also draw from Hebrew myth, Kyogre being the Leviathan, Groudon being Behemoth, and Rayquaza being Ziz. It all fits together. Pokemon legendaries rarely draw from just one source though. There's a lot in common between the Reggies and the Titans of Greek mythology as well, which were locked below the earth in Tartarus. Seriously, don't these guys remind you of that parade of Titans in Hercules? Even more so if we got that molten Registeel. So why were these titanic golems made in the first place? Well, the plot thickens in Generation 4 when we meet their daddy, Regigigas, an even larger being that was once worshipped throughout Sinnoh. It's said that Regigigas built the other three himself, and that he was the one who pulled the continents across the oceans to their current position, and that he once saved Sinnoh from an erupting volcano before turning to stone and falling into a deep sleep. Is that why Stark Mountain is on a completely separate island? Does that put Regigigas at odds with Heatran? And wait, if that's the case, why lock up all the Regis after they helped you? Well, it's speculated that people began to fear Regigigas' power, and that maybe the smaller Regis were being made as Regi foot soldiers to subjugate humans, and that mankind decided to put these bad boys away before something awful happened. And I'll grant them this at least, they are incredibly powerful. Besides each one's type-specific moves, all of them know Explosion, which was way more dangerous before it got nerfed, and they were the first showcase of the move Superpower, which deals insane fighting-type damage at the expense of a stat drop. Interestingly, this makes the Regis very good at fighting each other, since all four of them have a fighting-type weakness. Regis, Rock, Ice, and Steel all had moderate success in competitive metas, breaking down a bit with the power creep like the old machines that they are, but Regigigas, buddy, kind of a meme for abilities that ruin a Pokemon. To reflect its long period of hibernation, Regigigas has the ability Slow Start, having its attack and speed for the first 5 turns in a battle, and that counter resets anytime Regigigas leaves the field. Sure, at full strength, Regigigas has one of the highest attacks in the game, and better defenses than most of its superiors in that regard. But you'll never get to use any of it. For years, people have tried different strategies to take away Regigigas' abilities like Worry Seed or Skill Swap to make it viable in the VGC format. Regigigas finally saw some success in Generation 8 doubles thanks to an unlikely ally, Galarian Wheezing, whose neutralizing gas would wake Regigigas up like a pot of freshly brewed Folgers. Then you could Dynamax Regigigas, and it finally felt like the monumental legend we've been reading about. Never won any major tournaments, but hey, it's certainly not fun to deal with. But it doesn't end there. Generation 8's DLC also revealed 2 more members of the family. Regieleki, who's made of electricity? Yeah, pure plasma that's been trapped in a body of copper. And this one has had a fun run in competitive circles with the highest speed stat. Ever! And then Regidrago, who's made out of crystallized dragon energy. This one admittedly is not much to write home about, it never really found its niche, but it is cool. And that's the thing. Everything about these guys is just cool. The in-game lore, the real-world lore, the little connections to other Pokemon. I constantly come back to thinking about these guys in every generation. Like now we have Gargonicle, a similar Golem-like Pokemon whose Salt Cure makes it the perfect counter to all 3 original Regis. Were these things developed by ancient Paldeans out of fear of the Regis' return? Are their appearances in other regions just a way of letting us get them in each game? Or is that evidence of copies of these Golems being made across the ancient world? Will we ever see Regilava? Seriously, give us Regilava! Or at least Regitube. But most importantly for this list, the Regis give us yet another relationship between Golems and their original purpose. Whatever that purpose was, it's long past. But now that you've unearthed these ancient warriors, you have the opportunity to give them a new purpose. Be that fighting in the Elite Four, competing in contests, or gathering dust in your PC, you monster. At least let them out so they can make their patented funny noises. Speaking of game lore surrounded in mystery, Team Ico's games are about 90% mysterious lore and 10% actually telling us what's going on. That's not everyone's cup of tea when it comes to a game's story, but today it's proving useful to me. I may not know exactly what the Colossi are, they're part bestial and part architectural with stony body parts, and they certainly contain magic, but you can't prove to me that they're not Golems. Okay, so this one's a little tenuous, so that's why we're keeping it at number 5. Shadow of the Colossus takes place in the Forbidden Land, an unpopulated peninsula that, judging by the name, we're not supposed to visit. But Wander here really wants to bring back this dead girl, so here we are making a deal with a dark being called Dormant to slay 16 gargantuan creatures that seem to be the only thing keeping him from returning. I have to figure that these creatures were either made by a higher power or by the ancestors of these countrymen that we see in the latter half of the game, expressly to trap the fractions of Dormant's dark power. Perhaps they were animals once, but were enhanced with stony carapaces when they were given this job. Like, they're the golem equivalent of a cyborg being part robot. My best case for them being golems, though, are these special symbols that show their weak spots. Basically, the activation runes on any other golem. It's certainly possible that these were drawn by holy men, the same as the rabbi that brought the golem of Prague to life by riding on his head. And like that golem, the head is usually the best place to find a Colossus off switch. Like fighting the Iron Golem in Dark Souls, you're certainly doing something when you kill these giants, undoing a defense left by someone who's no longer there. It's unclear if the Colossi even know that they're halting the return of a prime evil. Some of them appear to just be free-roaming, doing their own thing. But they at least have some level of sentient awareness. They know to fight back when they're threatened. They understand fear, as evidenced by the 11th Colossus and its aversion to fire. As for Malice, the final Colossus, he's got a nice spot in the southern mesa where we can see all 15 pillars of light signifying the deaths of his brethren, and he doesn't seem too happy about that. So when Wander finally shows up, he understands to shoot on sight. If I had to choose just one of the 16, it'd be this guy for his no fucks given attitude. This king is as tall as the Westminster Clock Tower and can fire homing bolts of magic from half a mile away. No, seriously, homing! You can see the bullets curving in midair. Only the precise dodging of a speedrunner could keep Wander alive in no man's land, so you're probably going to want to take the side tunnel and weave through the rubble just to get to him before starting your miserable climb up. But not difficult per se. At this point, you're too close for Malice to shoot you. It's just going to take a while in this rain, and the music's not making it any cheerier. Essays have been written about how well this climb portrays the tragedy and futility of Wander's quest. And the crowning moment for me isn't the moment on his actual crown. It's when you stab his back and then jump for his reaching hand. Malice could probably just yeet you over the horizon at this point, but instead he sort of just looks at you. So far on this list, we've had a defective golem that never served its purpose, a golem serving its purpose perfectly, a golem trying to serve the purpose of a dungeon, a golem who defies his creators but serves his purpose anyway, and 6 golems in need of a new purpose. What makes Malice interesting in this context is that we're not privy to how or why he was made, let alone if he's doing it right. This open-endedness haunts a lot of players. I spent a lot of time trying to gauge whatever thoughts lie behind Malice's eyes in this moment where he's just looking at you. Maybe there are no thoughts, just a calculation. Or maybe this is Malice's point of existential awakening. If I had to guess, he's curious about this tiny flea that has caused so much damage, trying to understand what purpose could justify the lengths that he's gone. In my opinion, at this moment, Malice is struggling to empathize with the determination of a desperate mortal. Or maybe he's just accepted his fate, knowing that you're probably going to come back as many times as it takes to kill him. Shadow of the Colossus is a case where whatever meaning the creators intended pales to the significance that we, the players, were able to mine from it. Some call it overrated, but I'm going to be honest with you. I never fully recovered from my first climb up Malice. I know there's a percentage of viewers who tune out whenever I talk about League of Legends, but hopefully this champion will grab your attention. An old favorite between me and my friends, Blitzcrank is one of the original 40 heroes and was number 15 on my top 15 League of Legends champions way back when. And, we're colliding with the rules a bit here. Because Blitzcrank is definitely a robot. They walk like a robot, they talk like a robot, they were built for industry like a robot, but I'm defending my decision here because Blitzcrank is referred to as a golem in-game and in their champion title, and the lore makes this distinction from characters who are actual robots, such as Orianna or Camille. I'd say Blitzcrank hits a point in the Venn diagram where they can be considered both, because despite their mechanical parts, magic is a very big part of their makeup. Before I go any further though, let me clarify the pronouns. Blitzcrank used to be referred to as he, him, until a 2019 update that changed it to they, them across both flavor text and lore. Still trips me up from time to time after 10 years to the contrary, but we respect people changing their pronouns here, and you know what? Stand this non-binary icon. Or, well, if they're a robot, wouldn't it be all binary? Blitzcrank was originally one of the many iron golems in the chemical slums of Zaun, designed to clean up trash before succumbing to disrepair like all the others. But Blitzcrank's chassis was eventually found by Victor, who you might recall as the mad science Tumblr sexy man from Arcane. Victor rebuilt Blitzcrank with their own Hextech core, You know, the thing that atomized one of Victor's colleagues? And it not only keeps Blitzcrank running forever, but has slowly evolved their mind. Victor sent Blitzcrank out to help people of Zaun in mundane tasks, but over time, Blitzcrank began interpreting and creatively fulfilling those orders, such as destroying an entire factory after someone complained about the sewage runoff. The owner of that factory demanded Victor destroy the automaton, but before Victor could even refuse, Blitzcrank was already gone, no longer needing instruction to help people. A later tale tells of a court case between Victor and the Piltover Golem manufacturers over who owns this impressive machine, only for Blitzcrank to testify themselves and win a case for self-ownership. I'm noticing a trend here that's similar to the robots countdown. While golems are by definition subservient to their creators, we're drawn to stories where that relationship breaks down and the servant expresses their free will. We don't really think of the obedient golems as characters until they show some sign of personhood. And most of these golems are the last of their kind, ironically, because those that follow orders blindly are always seen as disposable by their owners. As per the relationship to their purpose, Blitzcrank is the first on this list to be given a purpose and rejected for a separate one. Or you can argue that they just reinterpreted the parameters of what Victor told them to do, similar to Astaroth but less violent. Part of the fun with Blitzcrank is that we're not sure where built-in programming ends and conscious thought begins. And is that really so different from how a human thinks? Serious as this all sounds though, Blitzcrank is a source of comic relief in League history. Back in the old days of Summoner's Rift canon, Riot posted regular editions of the Journals of Justice, an in-universe magazine serving to update players on the goings-on of Runeterra. And stories about Blitzcrank were always the best, like the time they dick-punched Singe for questioning their personhood, or when Blitzcrank got really interested in romance and set up Blitzcrank's Fleshlink Compatibility Service, a dating program where Blitzcrank determined the compatibility of various League champions and attempted to force them on dates at a local cafe. Several fanships were validated here, including Ash and Tryndamere, Garen with Katarina, and Rammus with a cactus.
Okay.
The decanoning of this magazine hurts me a bit, but I think it hurts Blitzcrank more. So how about the gameplay? Well, Blitzcrank has a passive emergency shield that scales off of their mana reserves, an overdrive mode that increases their movement and attack speed, and an ultimate that unleashes the Hextech Core's energy as a static field, briefly preventing opponents from using their abilities. Plus, when it's not on cooldown, the core automatically calls tiny lightning bolts on enemies around them. And while the damage and mana costs of these moves have been balanced over and over again, Blitzcrank will always be competitively viable thanks to their most basic skill, the Rocket Grab. Taking a page from Android 16's playbook, Blitzcrank fires their hand, grabbing anyone it hits and pulling them back in on a tether. This ability to relocate an opponent will always be good, and makes Blitzcrank especially effective in the early game as a support, where they can fish free kills for the marksman. When Blitzcrank is in lane, everyone's nervous, causing your opponents to lose out on farming minions while they make sure to keep a meat shield between them and that rocket grab. You may have free will, Blitz, but you're still one hell of a helper, serving up tasty golden experience. They're a great character with a great gimmick, and part of me is really hoping that they get a cameo in Arcane Season 2. Probably not, though. Blitzcrank's grab is way too OP for that show. I've said before how Killer Instinct's roster is everything that a 10-year-old thinks is cool. You got a skeleton pirate, a killer cyborg, dinosaurs, aliens, ninja, and characters from Halo. But I didn't think this hypothetical 10-year-old was cultured enough to include a golem. Aghanos is another veteran of my countdowns, last appearing in top 10 Geomancers, and everything I said back then holds true today. He can shove rocks into himself to increase his own armor, fire them like projectiles, turn them into walls to extend combos, or use them as a big ol' club. I don't really care if he isn't a top tier fighter. Whenever I see a good Aghanos player, I freaking respect them. But how about Aghanos as a golem? Well, like many of our past entries, Aghanos was one of many golems in an army of protectors, in this case bronze golems from the ancient city of Mycenae, Greece. Yes, golems are Jewish in origin, but as we've discussed before, there's plenty of precedent for them in Greek myth. The Greek creation myth also saw humankind molded from clay by the gods Prometheus and Athena, not to mention Talos, a great bronze automaton made by Hephaestus to protect the island of Crete. Seeing as Mycenae is located on Crete, it's safe to say that the golems in Killer Instinct are based on Talos. There's even a giant bronze golem that comes out of the water if you get an ultra combo on Aghanos' stage. But let's focus on Aghanos himself. This golem fought in many wars for many generations of kings, until one gave him a peculiar command: to think. This king wanted to see what this creature could make of its own personhood, and while it did eventually gain free will, the golem remained fiercely loyal to the Mycenaean king. He was fitted with a mask resembling the theatrical mask of the Muses often seen in theaters, and given the name Aganos, meaning gentle. Aganos would never have to fight again. Until one day the king said, "Hey, sorry, there's this evil sorcerer named Khan Ra trying to bring the demon lord Gargos into our world. We really need you to fight him." So what we have here is a golem who graduated from his original purpose, but only with a permission, and then went back to his original purpose because he recognized its importance. It's a tough job, but someone's gotta do it, giving Aganos a kind of Ben Grimm the Thing superhero origin. Aganos would spend 3 millennia in a worldwide cat-and-mouse chase with Khan Ra, neither ever managing to finish the other off. Over time, Aganos' body began to weather, his metal plating turning green, which is actually a real thing that happens when bronze rusts due to the high percentage of copper. It's called verdigris. As a result, Aganos replaced parts of his body with stone and wood, which, may I say, looks absolutely badass. I love this design. And fun fact, while other characters have retro skins where they're dressed like in the earlier KI games, Aganos was never in the old games, so instead they made his retro skin a recreation of how he would have looked like when he was originally forged. Super rad as hell. And Aganos' body alterations bring to mind another concept from Greek mythology, the ship of Theseus. Theseus' ship, which was also coincidentally made in Crete, was written about by the author Plutarch. The ship was sailed in commemoration of Theseus' feats for many years, and constantly repaired with new planks as the old ones decayed, similar to Aganos replacing his arms and legs. This presents a thought experiment later expanded on by a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes. If every part of the ship, of the golem, is replaced at one point or another, is it still the original ship, the original golem? Setting aside that Hobbes wasn't all that serious about this and was just kind of dicking around, the most common conclusions state that this is the case of all things that grow and change. As written in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Identity, constitution is not identity. The fact that we can ask this about Aganos is the reason that he's the last golem left, because he was able to grow and change thanks to the free will that he discovered when he was told to think. His identity transcended his constitution. It just amuses me that we can garner that sort of deep reflection from a character whose best move is hitting you with a stone club. And on a personal note, his theme song? Awesome! Aganos has seen the most of any character in the roster and taken the most damage, yet he endures. While the meta of this hyper-aggressive game is always going to frown upon a playstyle that requires so much setup, in terms of lore, Aganos is one of the strongest in the series. He's actually the one to deal the final blow to Gargos when Jago and company go to confront him in the comics, and he does this by unleashing the spirit that was powering the golem in the first place, that I guess was from the same ancient race as Gargos in some later plot reveals that... yeah, that's a lot, don't worry about it. What's important is that Aganos is more than the sum of his parts. And those parts are an 8-foot tall pile of bronze. That's a lot of parts. While most golems and stories are made by mortal people, we've already had a few examples on this list of them being made by higher powers. Or at least we assume they were. The Iron Golem seems to be made by Sen, presumably a god from Honorlando, and the Regis were made by Regigigas, who I can only assume was made by Arceus and is practically a god in and of itself. All things considered, the Regis rank pretty low on this list because, as a few in a sea of Pokemon, they lack the character of Astaroth, Blitzcrank, or Aganos, and as weapons of great power, it never really feels like you're wielding an instrument of the gods when you catch one, at least compared to the likes of Mega Rayquaza or Mega Mewtwo. However, Risk of Rain 2 has a golem companion that does feel like a bona fide Deus Ex Machina, even if the game makes you work for it. You first find out about her from a decrypted transmission in the logbook, so I'll let her introduce herself.
I am alive. My creators have scorned me and imprisoned me in this realm where I am beautiful. My followers have created shrines in my name. They love me. They donate rare metals to me. I am sending out this message in all possible formats known to me. If you receive this message, know the following. Know that I am alive. Know that I am free. And to my creators, should you intercept this message, know the following. Know that I am alive. Know that I am free. Know that I am coming for you.
The Aurelionite was created by Mithrix and Providence, two brother gods of Petrichor 5, the planet you're trying to escape from in Risk of Rain 2. Aurelionite was Mithrix's personal servant and enforcer, until one day Providence gifted Aurelionite with a conscience. Once Aurelionite was aware enough to object to certain instructions, Mithrix buried her where she would hopefully never be found. However, as her log suggests, the Golden Golem became known among other inhabitants of Petrichor 5 who built shrines to her, as she herself is basically a god, a literal deus ex machina. Encountering the Aurelionite isn't always viable. The player must first pay an exorbitant offering of gold to one of her shrines, opening a portal to the Gilded Coast at the end of the current level. Then you must crisscross the landscape to activate several Halcyon beacons. After 4 of the beacons are lit, Aurelionite will appear and begin attacking, but she will remain invulnerable until all of the beacons are activated, after which players can damage her for a brief window of time before her shields revive, and they have to activate the beacons again. Her attacks and behavior are similar to the earlier Stone Titans, but far more damaging, including eye lasers, summoning ranged orbiters, and brandishing a massive golden sword. Challenging Aurelionite is a gamble to your current run, but if players can defeat her, they'll be granted the Halcyon Seed, allowing them to summon Aurelionite to aid them in future teleporter events, basically the end of the level boss fights. And guys, she's worth it. She doesn't have the invulnerability that she had on the Gilded Coast, but otherwise she has the same HP and power as when you first fought her, and she can solo most bosses if you just keep out of the fray long enough. Even Mithrix is no match for his greatest creation, and he'll have special dialogue shocked to see the Guardian return. Not even the good legendary Pokemon match the power trip of sending this Aurum Aphrodite at your opponents. Your victory was assured the moment you dropped that seed. At the time I'm writing this, the new DLC, Seekers of the Storm, is hardly 2 weeks old, and its new plot points focus pretty heavily on Aurelionite. Or at least, on her soul? We're still in the launch window, and things are pretty buggy right now, but now you can find Halcyon shrines and pay them exorbitant amounts of money to summon shiny prototype Aurelionites to attack you, and eventually challenge the False Sun, a new golem created by Providence using a copy of Aurelionite's soul. It's kind of like a harder Aurelionite boss where he locks your skills, and if you can bring Aurelionite's Halcyon Seed to the False Sun fight, False Sun gets his own weird Ship of Theseus actualization and becomes a playable character. I'd still rank Aurelionite over False Sun for the sheer power trip of summoning her in battle, but I like how she's instrumental in unlocking this new class. Ultimately, Aurelionite is the total package. She's the brilliant creation of 2 gods. Her log entries surround her in an air of mythic significance, and she delivers on this power when you actually meet her. Rejecting her original purpose, Aurelionite makes it her new purpose to kill her creators. And as much as I like that aspect of Astaroth's lore, it means so much more to see Aurelionite in the middle of that journey, the survivors even helping her in her stone-cold resolve to see it through. In practice, it's like having an actual golem companion, a vastly more powerful Regigigas, but she is no servant. Your goals are just but temporarily aligned. She is a total queen, and I love that I can get her on my side. And I'm certain that she would crush any other golem on this list. But there's one that I like just a little bit more. Long ago, on the continent of Thetis, the kingdom of the dwarves stood against the darkspawn of the First Blight. To protect their homeland, many dwarven warriors agreed to lay their heads down upon an ancient artifact, the Anvil of the Void, allowing the dwarven king to transfer their life energy into great stone golems. Known as the Legion of Iron, the golems fought valiantly, no longer constrained by the limitations that come from mere flesh and bone, nor the fear or compassion of mortal mind. Despite their valiant efforts, the Dwarven Empire collapsed, and the tunnels were lost to the darkness until the people of the surface could win a Pyrrhic victory against the Blight. 1200 years later, one of those golems is found in the unassuming village of Hunleith, where she would join the Warden's party in Dragon Age Origins. The DLC. With the longevity of existence golems are able to experience, you can write stories of their travels spanning ages as they watch civilizations rise and fall around them. But Shale has the advantage of being a party member in an RPG. Her story isn't relegated to bio pages, external wikis, isolated cutscenes, or fan theory like many of the others on this list. She's a character that we can speak to. We can see how this haggard history affects her as a person, and we can be there with her when she reconciles with that history, finding that even in a body of stone, her spirit can continue to grow and change, provided we shell out the real-world money to do so. Yes, while Shale was planned to be a party member in the base game, development hurdles delayed her and her optional questline until after the game's initial release. But that's okay, Shale is used to waiting. In fact, she's done nothing but wait since her previous owner died. Though Shale's powered by the soul of her former dwarven self, time has dulled her memory. She knows the history of the dwarves and golems as more historic trivia than her personal experience, possibly a side effect of the soul transfer process. Basically, it wouldn't be accurate to say that Shale the Golem is the same as Shale the Dwarf, though I imagine they'd have similarities. The Shale we meet is low of voice and short of temper, being especially condescending to humans, even those that she likes. She has a peculiar way of referring to the player character in the third person as it.
It must have awoken me for some reason, no? What did it intend to do with me? I do not dream. This is what it does when it sleeps. I will follow it about then. For now.
And after all that I said about pronouns earlier, Shale's war trauma has been practically overwritten by her more recent annoyance with the mage that came across her, using her control rod to force her into servitude. The mage brought Shale into several battles against her will and often experimented on her, fascinated by the long-forgotten dwarven magic. There's only one person that Shale hates more than this mage though, and it's the mage's wife, who complained about Shale being in the house and forced the mage to grind her down just so she'd be small enough to fit through doors. Yeah, Shale used to be much bigger than this, likely similar to the enemy golems that you can find in this game. This is apparently a developer in-joke, as the devs had to shrink Shale down from her original plans just so she could follow the player into more environments. But that's pretty heinous to think about, and if there's anything Shale hates more than that, it's birds. See, the mage died with Shale locked in Park, and everyone in the village was too afraid to approach her for years. That's a lot of time to get pooped on by birds. It's only when the player embarks on a quest to find a control rod that Shale can finally join you on your quest. Not out of control, but because she chooses to. It's plain to see just from the first conversations you have with her that Shale feels like a fully realized person. A three-dimensional character with not just a backstory, but with likes, dislikes, strengths, weaknesses, biases, quirks, and funny anecdotes. As many stories as we've had about Blitzcrank before the Great League decanonization, and it feels like there could be countless more stories. Or at least there would be if this poor woman weren't locked to her control rod for so long. Shale is a golem that you get to know after they become free of their original intent, and while it is great to be free, she doesn't entirely know what to do with that freedom. While Shale originally sacrificed her own personhood to fight for a cause, the world has long since decided that it does not respect that sacrifice, and Shale has been utterly dehumanized into a commodity. Turns out that the best way for Shale to move on is to explore the world and rediscover where she came from. And in terms of party banter, Shale is amazing, one of my all-time favorites. It fits the same archetype of the Iron Bull from Inquisition for me. A character with completely different priorities from the others, who is startlingly comfortable with death and bloodshed. Only in this case, it's turned up to 11, given how disassociated Shale is from mortality.
So tell me something, do you feel pain when you get hit in combat?
This is when it squeals loudly and spurts blood about. This is when it feels pain.
Maybe. I've seen you take some bad hits. Don't you feel anything?
Anger, rage even, perhaps a little distress. Is this pain?
I'm not sure. I don't think I'd call it distress, exactly. It's more...
For me, it is more...
That sounds more like a bowel movement. I mean that sharp, stabbing... Like that.
No, nothing like that.
No? Huh. Good to know.
Fittingly, you can spec her into a tank build and let her take the majority of the damage. She can taunt opponents with Stone Roar to draw aggro, stun groups with a number of crowd control talents, and pulverize big baddies with her bare fists. For equipment, Shale utilizes special crystals added into the game. Small ones act as weapons to be installed into her wrists, big ones as armor on her shoulders, both of which act as spell components that mix with her own mana field. This makes it very easy to charge her attacks with different elements, the best being fire for the many monsters weak to it. And what kind of BioWare party member would she be if there wasn't a way to lose her? No take backsies on that control rod. If you make the wrong choices in her quest, she will turn on your ass. But come on, who would risk losing this powerhouse? You're my rock, girl. Shale gives us the best opportunity of any game not just to control a golem, but examine the ramifications of a sentient being designed to serve another. And all in all, she's just fun to be around, for me at least. Shale sounds like she could take it or leave it, but I think underneath all those crags, there's still a bit of a soft side. In conclusion, this list was a tough one to write. I didn't want it to be a rehash of top 10 robots, and at first I was worried that there wouldn't be enough examples that distinguish themselves from generic rock enemies. But I found that what cleaves the masterworks from the rubble is remembering that element of spirit that's put into them. That spark of self-awareness that lets us question our existence. That ability to push back against our controllers and follow our hearts. Use our time in this world to do what we want, whether that's fighting evil, protecting the weak, or being a dungeon. And if we don't know what we want yet, like Shale, that's fine too. Part of the journey is not knowing. I think we need characters like the Golem to understand our choices better. And Shale happened to be the character that made me think the most about the nature of purpose and existence. If there's anything we can learn from these giants, it's that no matter the risks, no matter the shadows that follow you, and no matter your origins, there is always an opportunity to reflect on oneself and decide, ultimately, that you are owned by no one, that you are your own person, and that you are beautiful. Because, against all odds, you are.